author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Basement strategies abound for the 2024 election, and Georgia has some big surprises for us in the form of Donald J. Trump. Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network, so tune in wherever you can. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. The presidential campaigns are in full swing, but with a difference, and we're going to find out what that difference is right here on Liberty Nation Radio. I'm very happy to welcome back longtime host of this here radio show and Liberty Nation's senior political analyst, Mr. Tim Donner. Thanks for coming back in, Tim.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Now, I should inform our audience that Tim has deigned to only do 2 segments with us. Usually, Tim deserves the full 4, but we have something quite exciting later in the show about Fani Willis with Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Scott D. Cosenza. So that's also worth looking out for. So, Tim, you are putting pen to paper at a shocking rate these last couple of weeks, examining what's happening with the election, the 2024 presidential election. And let's be fair, in terms of Liberty Nation's, let's call it the hit rate, it's just been fantastic. It's all Tim Donner all the time. Tim, what's your latest theory?
On why people are reading me?
No, on what's happening with the campaigns.
No. Okay, so here's the theory, and this, I'm in the process of writing this. By the time you hear this, it'll be up on LibertyNation.com. And the basic idea is how to win an election by doing nothing. Now, in 2020, Joe Biden did less in his campaign than any candidate since the 19th century that used to campaign from their front porch. And an incumbent usually did that because it was beneath them to have to go out and campaign among the unwatched masses.
The Rose Garden strategy. That's what it was called, right?
That's
but this
exactly
was
right.
The Rose basement.
And this is
the Rehoboth basement strategy.
And here's the point. This is what Biden would have loved to do again in 2024. He would have loved to advance a Rose Garden strategy where he would make presidential proclamations from the White House and let his surrogates go out and do the heavy lifting and insulting Trump and suing him and indicting him and everything else. But the problem for Biden is now the reverse of 2020. He has to get out there as much as he can and reassure people, while Donald Trump actually, in my view, needs to do exactly what Joe Biden did in 2020, i.e. nothing. And the reason is you can start with a basic political principle when your opponent is in the process of destroying himself. Don't get involved. Don't intervene. Don't do anything. And that's what Joe Biden did in 2020. He felt that if he just let Trump go out there and demonstrate the things that people didn't like, he didn't have to do anything except appear to be a normal alternative to Donald Trump. Well, this time, if you think about it, everybody knows what Donald Trump is all about. They know what he feels about immigration. They know what he feels about the deep swamp. They've seen his record for 4 years having been president. They saw his peace, his prosperity, no new foreign wars, a roaring economy that had everybody, feeling good about their finances. He doesn't need to do anything except let people sit back and do a head-to-head comparison between him and Joe Biden. And the inevitable result will be that people will have relatively fond memories of life under the Trump administration compared to under Joe Biden. So in a sense, what I'm saying is Donald Trump needs his own basement strategy for 2024. And of course, Mark, another good reason is you just never know when he's going to go out and create a headline with something like um, poisoning the blood of the country, um, those sort of remarks, which are gratuitous, entirely unnecessary. But that's Trump. The people that thought he would be more presidential, give it up. It's not going to happen. That's not
Yeah.
who he is. But if his very competent campaign team convinces him that the way to win, which is ultimately the strategy, that the best way to do it is by steering clear of an aggressive campaign. Now, whether he can do that or not, you know how much he lives for those huge rallies. He loves them, but he tends to go off the rails and say things that can then be used against him. Look, everybody knows that he's a loose cannon. He doesn't need to go out and remind them of that. What he needs to do is sit home and let people see the Biden presidency up close and personal, because it seems from almost every angle, Mark, that Joe Biden is unelectable in 2024 unless Trump does something. As somebody put it recently, only Trump can save Biden from electoral defeat. And the best way to stop him from doing that is to put him in the basement and have him say as little as possible.
Some very, very good points there, Tim. It's the phrase that popped into my head was Dale Carnegie's "How to win elections and not alienate people" is probably the right way to look at it.
I may actually use that as the title then, Mark.
Could be a good subtitle.
Yes.
Good subtitle.
True.
You heard it here first,
have,
folks. This is how creativity works. Yeah, how often does an article get written because a good line comes along? Now, I want to come on
way too often, actually.
I want to come on a few points that you made there, Tim. So you say, and I agree completely, that his best strategy is a basement strategy for Donald Trump, because Joe Biden, whenever he has to go out now, he's on the back foot, and that's showing weakness, that he can't use a Rose Garden strategy, because he's desperately unpopular. On pretty much every topic, he's underwater on every issue that's important. So he has to go out and reassure people. But the problem is, like, for example, when he was rebutting the Robert Hur special counsel report about his cognitive abilities, he went out to go and set the record straight as soon as that came out about why he's an elderly, well-meaning young man who essentially was not competent to stand trial, or would not be seen as competent enough to be convicted by a jury of his peers, which is what Robert Hur was getting at. But then he went out on stage and confused Mexico and Egypt. It was an embarrassment. But here's the thing: he's got to go out and do that all over the country now, especially in those crucial swing states. And I don't think that he can keep it reined in enough. I think there'll be stumbles. He'll be wandering around stage like a Roomba trying to get off.
Well, they have some answers to this. The best answers they have in the Biden campaign is to not put him in situations where he's standing, but to put him in situations where he's sitting, like he did in that bizarre Super Bowl ad about shrinkflation, where he's sitting in an empty movie theater. And then you see him sitting at a table in a political ad, sitting at the head of a table, eating fried chicken with black people, which is an unusual choice, given that plays right into the worst kind of stereotype.
Starts throwing out watermelon straight after, right?
But the point is that he's sitting and he's in a controlled situation, and I think that's their best hope, is that they can try to put him in controlled situations where he's seated instead of standing, and where he's not going to take any questions from the press. Look, it's a riverboat gamble for him to get out there more, because really that's just a reminder of something he cannot control, which is his neurological decline. It's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. There's no remedy, there's no medicine, there's no treatment to reverse that, except to pump him full of whatever he needs to get out on stage and sound coherent. So, at this point, I think he has to do something that I don't think he can do, the same way Donald Trump had to get out there in 2020 and convince people of something that they didn't believe, which was that he was under control, that his temperament was acceptable to the broad mass of people, and that he had a handle on the pandemic. It's a total reversal of fortune since 2020.
It absolutely is. We're going to come right back on this topic after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back with Liberty Nation senior political analyst and long-term host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking about Tim's theory, and it's a very good one, that Donald Trump this election season is better off doing what Joe Biden did in 2020, stay in the basement, let Joe Biden destroy himself through various appearances, if he makes any at all that are unscripted, and then just not remind people of Trump, not to remind people of his rather abrasive attitude. Now, we talked very, very briefly coming into the end of the last segment about how COVID played a part in that as well. It's very easy for Joe Biden to stay home saying, well, it's COVID. This is why we don't have big rallies. This is why I'm staying at home. But something very, very new that I noticed is that now the Biden administration is trying to say that the reason that there were more COVID deaths after Joe Biden took office. Now, remember, on the debate stage, Joe Biden said anybody who's responsible for that amount of deaths doesn't deserve to be president. And then, of course, he became president, and there were more deaths under his presidency.
There were twice as many under his presidency as under Trump.
And so what he credits with Trump, the problem, how he credits the problem to Trump, is that he said Trump didn't do the vaccine rollout right. Now, let's remember, COVID landed in U.S. shores late 2019. The vaccine program was called the Warp Speed?
Operation Warp Speed.
Yeah.
And people basically said at the beginning of that process that there was no way Trump couldn't
be done.
The goals. But I'll tell you what, a re-election campaign is a good incentive for a president to solve a problem like that. Yeah. And he did. This kind of revisionist history is not going to fly. First of all, COVID is not really an issue anymore. It certainly was in 2020. Now it is not an issue. And if he's going after that, it just shows how desperate he is, because look, I read leftist opinion and commentary all the time. And right now, after they said months of saying, well, Biden needs to go and sell the economy because it's actually doing so well, even though people don't realize it. That didn't work, Bidenomics. Then they tried to say that, well, inflation's coming down, and things are getting better, and we have wonderful unemployment numbers and growth rate and all of these things, which in ordinary circumstances, Mark, frankly, should work pretty well for an incumbent president. But I think people realize that these economic indicators have nothing to do with Joe Biden. Well, it's probably the residual effect from the Trump economy, but that's just a theory, and I'm not an economist. But they now have said the left has been reduced to saying that Biden has no other choice except to run a singular message in his campaign, which is that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, an authoritarian dictator in waiting, who even admitted he would be a dictator on day one, which was said in jest, but of course they took it seriously. There's no other issue. They've tried everything else. Nothing has worked. They tried the CHIPS Act. They tried the Inflation Reduction Act. Look at all the legislation. That just doesn't translate to people who are paying ridiculous prices for groceries and gas and for their home heating bills. It just doesn't fly.
You mentioned you're not an economist, so I wouldn't go specifically into the job numbers. Andrew Moran was on this show quite recently, and I think why people have stopped touting the job numbers and things like this, and why they've moved to, as you say, the strategy of Trump's the danger to democracy, is because people have started peeling back the headline numbers. And yes, there are more jobs in the economy, but that's because individuals now have more jobs than one. And that's what's actually driving it rather than new full-time ones. It's new extra jobs on top of people. So once people started stripping back the headline numbers, that whole narrative kind of crumbled.
You know, people vote on how they feel. They don't vote so much with their
overworked and underpaid is how many people are feeling in America.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. When they can't get nearly as much, costs 20% more now for a bag of groceries than it did when Joe Biden became president. That's something that people feel every single day. Inflation is something that, you know, if it went up last month, if it goes up again, that issue's going to be front and center, and Joe Biden, if it's possible, will be even less popular than he is now.
That would be something to see. Now, let's get back to your original thesis here that Joe Biden needs to get out and Donald Trump needs to stay at home. Now, there's actually Donald Trump is doing something quite similar to that with these phone-ins, which I think is quite fascinating. So what he's doing is he's phoning in to various events around the country, and he's given like a tailored message. They put him on the speaker, and you know, and he's talking to a tailored message to that group, so he can actually appear at like 10 different rallies in a day, other people's rallies with the phone-ins.
And he can do that because he has the gravitas, the experience, and having been president. You know, let's put it this way: Dean Phillips couldn't get away with that.
Oh yeah,
right.
No chance.
Joe Biden really couldn't get away.
That's what I wanted to bring up. Joe Biden tried it, and it was like speaking to your elderly grandfather on like a FaceTime call, and is this working? Can you hear me?
How do I get this? Where's the button for
That's exactly what it was like. But this is the president. They've got a comms team to rival anything in the world, and yet they still couldn't get that right. And it was quite shocking. Now, one more subject I want to jump on.
Look, I will say this as a final comment on that. You can put a bonnet on a warthog, but it's still a warthog.
Indeed it is. One quick subject I want to dive into. We've heard the Biden campaign is boasting about the amount of cash it has on hand, especially its January fundraising haul, compared to the GOP and Donald Trump. And I just wanted to get your opinion on that, because we've got only about a minute left, but is it not money that always wins elections?
If that was true, we'd be talking about the 8-year reign of Hillary Clinton, because she sure as heck raised, about twice as much as Donald Trump in 2016. I don't really think that fundraising is going to decide this election, because everybody knows the candidates. They're so well formed. They're so well established quantities in the opinion of the American people who've seen each of them for 4 years. I think that's really the sum total of it.
Tim Donner, thank you ever so much for joining us.
A lot of fun, Mark. Thanks.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
The fallout from Fani Willis's case against Donald Trump in Georgia continues, and we are lucky to be joined by somebody who has followed the story possibly even closer than myself, which is quite unbelievable when I tell you about the hours I've invested into this particular case, is Mr. Scott DiCosenza, excellent host of the Uprising podcast, Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, and a man who knows pretty much everything there is to know about the ins and outs of this case. Let's put him on the spot. Hi, Scott.
Some of the things that I have to plow through in order to get conversant with it, to discuss with you, are a slog and deserve greater compensation and plaudits for me for having to do it. This was it is like a soap opera. I encourage people to watch the many, many hours of testimony themselves so they can enjoy all that's befolded. But it's almost like no matter how long we talk about it, the breadth and scope of the dramas that have occurred during this case won't really be revealed. But I'm happy to try to get through it as much as we can.
Yeah, so for me, the one of the latest things is I still can't get my head quite around the 2 days of testimony that were
Yes.
given by Nathan Wade, the prosecutor in the case, and Fani Willis, the Fulton County DA, which covers obviously Fulton County, which covers Atlanta,
Right.
which is the office bringing the case. But their testimony, it was. I didn't realize, Scott, that all I had to do to avoid any legal impunity was to shout at the lawyer who was questioning me and call him a liar, and then I get preferential treatment. I wasn't aware that was how the legal system worked, Scott.
So you're referring, of course, to Fani Willis's disgraceful display on the witness stand during her trial her trial, actually, that's a funny way to say it. We'll get back to that. During the hearing in Judge McAfee's courtroom. And to be clear, her behavior was disgraceful. It would have been disgraceful for any witness. For an attorney, you add the real disgraceful moniker to it, that she is the current occupant of the office of district attorney in that jurisdiction, Mark, and it's beyond the pale. I can't even tell you how racist it is to hear from so many in the United States of America that this is like a celebratory or laudatory moment, her pushing back in the way that she did. You do not exhibit a contemptuous attitude towards the proceedings or the people in a court of law and expect to walk away from it. And if she wasn't the district attorney and she wasn't a black woman, she probably would have been held in contempt of court and either had to spend some hours or a night in jail or pay a significant fine, because Judge Scott McAfee is being very lenient. And I can tell you this, one of the things, I wrote about this for LibertyNation.com and wrote about Judge McAfee, and I praised his performance. And there is, within his excessive leniency, there is some praise there. And I'll do a sports analogy, which I think is probably easy for people to understand. I don't know how you do over there with your odd sports and if this is a cricket thing or not. But in America, for instance, you can have a referee that kind of keeps things close to the book, right? Calls a tight game, or you can have a ref that kind of lets the guys play and kind of lets things be a little bit more loose. And both of those two tracks are acceptable to all who play. But what you can't have is a ref that calls things tight for one side and loose for another, right? And Judge McAfee, even though he lets the team play loose, as it were, he doesn't waver and change for one side or another. So at least he's consistent with letting the people hang themselves, as it were, and not demanding respect for the court like I think he should.
I'd like to come back on that, because I obviously am not familiar with jurisprudence of the United States nor what is expected. But one thing that really stood out to me, so much so that I commented just after watching it, I was making a gag to somebody, that the defense attorney for Nathan Wade and Fani Willis was absolutely superb. I just had no idea why he was sitting in the judge's chair. And I'll bring up a specific incident there.
I didn't get that, by the way, but
so there was one point where Mr. Wade was being questioned, and the lawyer doing the questioning at the time
said, and Mr. Wade, for people who don't know, is Ms. Willis's appointed choice to run the prosecution of Donald Trump and his RICO co-defendants, and also her former paramour.
Yes. So he was being questioned, and the lawyer asked a question that required a yes or no answer. And the judge said, haven't we already covered this ground? And the lawyer made the case, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, well, here's the thing, Your Honor. If he answers yes, that means he perjured himself before. If he answers no, that means that the charges against him are factual. So I just need him to answer yes or no. And the judge says, I think we've already covered this, and forced him to move on. At that point, the lawyer said, well, then I have no more questions, and gave way to another chair. And I thought that was just, I mean, Sure, I'm looking at it from a journalistic point of view, but also from somebody who's enjoying the soap opera. And it's like it comes to a cliffhanger ending here. And
Right.
I want that yes or no. I want to see which way this flips. And I'm denied it by the judge. That is, it may be good jurisprudence, but it was very poor television, in my opinion.
The only thing I haven't seen a single item of law and ruling on the law that or admissibility that the judge has made that I would disagree with. Just the tenor and attitude that he allows in his courtroom. By the way, exhibited both by witnesses for the prosecution of Donald Trump and also by defense counsel. I've seen behavior by them that I thought was totally unacceptable in the manner they were questioning a witness. Now, I would tell you this, though. Let's say that Fani Willis was shut down the first moment she had, kind of exhibited her sassy attitude of contempt for the proceedings. America would have been denied the benefit of seeing her. In other words, you could make the case, Mark, and I'm not suggesting that this was Judge McAfee's motivation at all. I have no reason to believe that it is. But just in my analysis, you could make the case that the best thing to happen for disqualifying her is letting people see the emotion and how it's not a clinical prosecution. It's not about the facts and the law. And what it's about is this woman with an emotional problem who doesn't take direction well and won't adhere to the lines of the law well, and maybe in fact perjured herself along with her lover to accomplish her ends.
That's something I wanted to follow up. So there's some possible. Mr. Wade seems to be in more trouble than Miss Willis at present. Could you go into that a little bit for us?
Well, there are extra things to document his lies, basically at present. So part of the whole controversy concerns when they started their romantic relationship.
Sure. If I could just make that clear to everybody, if
this is
she appointed him,
this is one of the key.
Yeah. If she appointed him,
let me actually fully set the table. So what happened in the case so far is that one of Mr. Trump's co-defendants, Mr. Roman, said that the whole indictment should be thrown out because of it was sort of poisoned in its inception because of this inappropriate relationship between Mr. Wade and Ms. Willis, that she basically is his sugar mama and appointed him to do this prosecution so that her boyfriend could benefit, and also that he could then shower and return that benefit in terms of lavish trips and gifts on Ms. Wade.
Yeah. So it all comes down to the date when their relationship started, which is
if that happened after her appointment of him, they're on much better ground than if it happened prior to it.
Yeah. Although I do believe the questioning lawyers asked her did she know that it was inappropriate according to Georgia County statutes, which of course the judge then said, well, we're not covering Georgia County statutes, and shut him down again on that one. But
exactly. By the way, you got to remember there are a million. You think of like somebody walking down a busy street and there are a million distractions to get from point A to point B, and the judge's job, without pride or prejudice or caring which way the outcome goes, is about getting that delivering that end goal. And it's appropriate for him to eschew and mandate, kind of casting aside all extraneous things that an attorney might wish to add in. So getting back to your question as to why is perhaps Mr. Wade has more jeopardy attached to his actions, is because of in his divorce proceedings, he filed some paperwork that indicates in an additional way that the relationship started in a way that he then swore under testimony that it didn't. So it's another thing. He almost certainly, Mark, will be subject to a disciplinary hearing on his law license, and it wouldn't surprise me to learn that he was eventually disbarred as a result of what's happened here. And perhaps that Ms. Willis will share that fate as well. But it's a little premature for her for that.
So the documents that Mr. Wade allegedly perjured himself with, those aren't available to the public. They'll be seen, I believe it's called in camera, which means
perjury is a judgment. I'm not alleging. I'm saying the man perjured himself. To be clear, other people may say that it's alleged. He filed a thing that said one thing, and then he testified to another thing. Now, that could be an accident. If you believe it's an accident, he hasn't said it's an accident. I think that, it's funny because we do want to be very careful because of libel and defamation laws that we don't cast. I can't imagine a case where this isn't true. I'm comfortable saying that the man perjured himself.
And the remedies for that are that he will be reviewed and either given some kind of stiff penalty, disbarred, or cut some kind of deal. Is that about right?
The more impactful consequence, perhaps, to that is that Donald Trump's criminal indictment is dismissed.
You're jumping to C. I was trying to make from A to B.
So potentially, So what I suspect is that there's probably a Republican attorney in Georgia who's motivated against these folks politically, who's already filed, perhaps. I don't mean to suggest that I know about this happening.
Sure.
I just mean it's a big enough place. There's enough actors in there. If this happened in a place where I was licensed to practice law, I might consider doing it, as any lawyer might when they witness such activity. And then if that happens, then I'm not a Georgia lawyer, but the licensing authority, the Board of Law Examiners, or whoever it's called in Georgia, would, have a disciplinary hearing and examine the case, and perjury in this type of manner, right, to benefit oneself. It's not like lying to a court is one thing. That's a little bit different than perjury, because it's not a sworn statement. So even if you just lie to a court, so if you say to the judge who wants to start the trial on Monday that you can't because you have a prepaid vacation that starts on Monday, and maybe it wasn't actually prepaid, that alone is a big thing, to make a misrepresentation to a court as a lawyer. But if you then swear on that statement, right? I swear the above is true and to the best of my, well, that's another order of severity that I expect the bar will eventually say, oh, we can't abide this. And of course, it's the most public. It's not like, some quiet thing that could go away, right? So,
well, that would be interesting to follow, to see if the actions of Miss Willis and Mr. Wade are eventually the downfall, not of Mr. Trump, but of the case against Mr. Trump and his co-defendant, specifically Mr. Mike Roman, I guess, would be the first domino in this particular chain. And we'll be coming back with some more of Donald Trump's legal trials, which seem to dominate the headlines nowadays, with Mr. Scott D. Cosenza after this short break. Don't go anywhere. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. We're continuing our conversation with legal affairs editor and host of the Excellent Uprising podcast, Mr. Scott D. Cosenza. Earlier in the show, we were talking about the Fani Willis and Nathan Wade testimony in Georgia. And I'd like to come straight back to that, Scott, just because I think there's a couple of avenues that haven't been explored
great fun,
yet.
Mark, to discuss.
It is. It's Falcon's Crest. It's Dallas. It's Dynasty. It's all of the 80s stuff wrapped up into a neat little bundle. Now, so what are the I guess this is the big question. What are the ramifications for Donald Trump coming out of this?
Okay, so what the Judge McAfee is now deciding on is whether or not the defendants have met their burden to suggest that the inappropriate relationship between Ms. Wade and Mr. Willis, or I keep saying Ms. Wade, Mr. Wade and Ms. Willis was enough to
it's the 2020, Scott. It doesn't matter.
was enough to violate the defendant's rights to fairness, and if so, then what's the remedy? So it could be, even though perhaps you and I might disagree, the judge could say, no, I'm not weighing in on their personal behavior, but professionally, it doesn't rise to the level of misconduct that would trigger any consequence for the indictment or the prosecution going forward. And in that case, that's it. Nothing happens.
Yeah.
Meaning nothing happens as an order from Judge McAfee. Going forward, then Ms. Willis could continue to rely on Mr. Wade to do this prosecution. Now, I have some thoughts on whether or not that would actually occur. I think it probably wouldn't, given what we know now. But in any case, that could be the consequence. Or if Judge McAfee thinks that there was impropriety, that it impacted the rights of the defendants. Let's all remember, this is what, it's all through the lens of you have a right as a defendant to not have the inappropriate, relationship generate your indictment. So if it did, then the judge can say, well, the district attorney and her aides and appointees can't prosecute this case, but the state of Georgia can still go ahead and prosecute Mr. Trump if they want to. So therefore, the prosecution mechanism itself is tainted, but not the indictment itself.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
And when one prosecutor goes and gets an indictment against a person, it's not DeKalb County or Fulton County or Fani Willis versus Donald Trump. It's the state of Georgia or the people of the state of Georgia versus Donald Trump. And so even if Fani Willis gets hit by a bus tomorrow, the indictment still stands unless and until a prosecutor or the state says something about it. So if that happened, the case would go to a Georgia State Prosecutors Association, a state office that's run by prosecutors, to assign competent counsel to prosecute the case. Now,
but to determine if the case should be continued or not, also, presumably.
The case lands in their lap. They have it, and they get a fresh eye on it. They don't have to continue the case. They can bring the charges or not bring them, as the case may be. Now, the huge benefit to that is the time involved, but we'll get into that in just a second. So that's one end of the spectrum of there was a problem, and we're going to correct the problem. The other end is literally the judge could rule that the indictment itself is so tainted and poisoned by Ms. Willis's actions and Mr. Wade's action that it needs to be thrown out. And within that capacity of throwing it out, they can also throw it out, quote unquote, with prejudice, which means that they can't refile the charges. If they're not thrown out with prejudice, then another prosecutor, presumably even Ms. Willis, could refile charges. Now, all those things that we've just talked about that involve Ms. Willis not continuing to prosecute this case likely mean any prosecution advances well past the November presidential election, which of course is, as some of us suspect, the entire reason to bring the case is not election interference in the previous presidential election, but that Donald Trump is interfering with Democrats' election in the 2024 race by attempting to win it. And so it would be a win for Trump in any case if they take off Ms. Willis's office in any capacity, because it's a win for him, likely pushing proceedings well past the November elections.
And I guess that is in all of the indictments that 4 indictments, 91 felony counts that Donald Trump is facing, his best legal strategy is, as we've discussed before, to become president of the United States, correct?
Well, there's an interesting wrinkle about that. Yes, generally speaking, that's true. It is important to remind everyone that these are state charges.
Yes.
So the federal charges,
the Georgia
Donald
ones
Trump
are state
can literally, the second he is sworn in, he can have the attorneys revoke those charges, fire them, the ones who issued it, let their replacements say to the court, and also issue himself a pardon. If he's smart, he'll have the pardon written out, waiting for his signature. And the second he takes the oath,
raises his hand off the Bible on the 20th of January,
right. With the other hand,
with a pardon stuck to it.
Yeah. But he cannot do the same thing with state charges. And in fact, one of the reasons why so many Never Trump folks were celebratory over both Mr. Bragg's criminal charges against him in New York and Ms. Willis's criminal charges in Georgia is that they can't be pardoned away. However, because he would then be president of the United States, he may be able to suspend that prosecution for the term of his presidency effectively. I mean, it's almost the whole game. I wanted to put that asterisk in there just to so everybody's clear with what the record is. But you're right in saying winning is the best strategy for him. If he can win, most of it goes away, and what doesn't go away will maybe eventually go away.
A quick turnaround on your thoughts on the $350 million civil verdict against Donald Trump in New York.
Mark, all my training and experience leads me to believe it will be reduced significantly on appeal. It is a monster order, like he blew up a small town with children in schools rather than some paperwork violation that nobody got injured over. So I think the smart money bet is it gets reduced massively.
Scott DeCascenza, thank you ever so much for being with us. Thank
you, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio. And I'd like to thank especially you at home for taking the time to tune in. Your attendance is appreciated. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. Publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are libertynation.com.